over in the cottage. It's quite an old one, and there's lots of stories in it. I didn't get a chance to read all the ones that I wanted to. One of the ones I did want to, I'm going to read to you now. It's called Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time there was a poor woodcutter who lived on the edge of a great forest with his wife and 2 children, Hansel and Gretel. The time came when the woodcutter found he could no longer earn enough to feed his family. "What can I do?" he asked his wife as they sat one night by candlelight. "We only have a crust of bread left. When that is gone we will surely starve." "We must take the children to the forest and leave them there," said his wife. "It's a hard thing to do, but it's better than watch them starve to death." Now the woodcutter's wife had a loud, shrill voice, and Hansel heard every word she said. As soon as the couple retired to bed, he slipped downstairs, opened the back door, and went into the garden where he filled his pockets with shining white pebbles. Early the next morning the woodcutter and his wife took Hansel and Gretel deep into the forest and left them, thinking they would never find their way home. But Hansel had laid a trail with his shining white pebbles. "All we have to do is follow the pebbles," he told Gretel. "They will lead us safely back to the cottage." The woodcutter was overjoyed to see his children again, but his wife could hardly hide her disappointment. Soon she began to nag and bully her husband. This time we must take them further into the forest," she said. "We must make certain they are really lost." Hansel was taken by surprise when at the end of the week the woodcutter and his wife once again led them into the forest. He had no pebbles to drop. Instead he dropped pieces of bread his mother had given him to eat for his dinner. Alas, the hungry birds of the forest swooped down and ate up every single crumb. "Now we are really lost," Gretel sobbed when they found themselves alone. "The birds have eaten all the bread and already it's growing dark." Oh, poor Hansel and Gretel. "Don't cry, little sister," Hansel said bravely. "If we keep walking we are sure to find somewhere we can rest. Come on." The sun was beginning to set when suddenly they came upon the strangest looking cottage they had ever seen. It was made of gingerbread and sugary biscuits. "Look, look," Gretel screamed with delight. "Oh, I'm so hungry, I must have a nibble." "Me too," explained Hansel. "Where shall we begin?" "Well, fancy that, a house or a cottage made out of gingerbread and sugary sweets. Yum, yum, yum." Presently an old woman came out of the cottage. She had a long hooked nose and she walked with a crutch. "Welcome, dear children," she said in a harsh, cackling kind of voice. "Don't be afraid. Come inside and see what a delicious supper I have prepared for you." Now the old woman was really a cruel witch who enjoyed eating little children, and her gingerbread house was a trap. Of course Hansel and Gretel didn't know this, and as the day passed they grew lazy and contented. Then, one terrible day, the old woman showed herself in her true colours. She grabbed hold of Hansel and thrust him into a small cage. "You will be the first in my oven," she muttered. "I will keep you in the cage until you are fat enough to eat." When Hansel was locked up in the cage, the cruel witch told Gretel that she must be her servant, clean the kitchen and fetch water from the well. "You obey me in everything," she shouted, "until it is your turn to be fattened up and eaten." Now, like most witches, the old hag had poor eyesight, and so whenever she went to the cage to see how fat Hansel was growing, she always told him to thrust out his arm. Clever Hansel always pushed out a chicken bone for the witch to feel, and the witch grumbled and muttered to herself when she felt the bone, for it seemed to her that the boy was taking a very long time to grow round and plump. Soon the witch was feeding Hansel with apple pies and cream buns 3 or 4 times a day. But to Gretel she only gave scraps, and she kept her working, scrubbing floors, polishing and sweeping, every moment from early morning until late at night. At last the wicked witch grew impatient. "I will wait for that skinny brother of yours to grow fatter." No longer," she told Gretel. "Fetch my biggest mixing bowl and get out the flour and the butter. Today I'll make a pastry. When you have done that, get the oven ready." Trembling and scarcely able to hold back her tears, Gretel ran to obey the old witch. But when the moment came to light the gigantic oven, she protested that the door was too heavy for her to open. "Stupid girl," the witch muttered, and she hauled over to the oven and pulled open the heavy door herself. Then she lit the oven and went back to her pastry making. But from time to time she went over to the oven to test its heat. Gretel watched her, wondering if she dared carry out the plan which had come into her mind. I must," she told herself. The next time the witch went over to the oven and opened its heavy door, Gretel crept up behind her and with all her strength pushed the wicked witch with her foot. Fear and determination made Gretel very strong, and the witch tumbled forward into the oven. Still feeling strong and brave, Gretel caught hold of the big oven door and slammed it shut. Then she ran to the next room where she knew the key of the cage was kept. Soon she had set her brother free. "Let's escape from this horrible place at once," Gretel begged, as she kissed and hugged her brother. Hansel shook his head. "Not before we have taken some of the witch's treasure. She is dead now and cannot harm us, and everybody knows a witch's treasure belongs to the one who finds it." So before the children finally left the gingerbread house, they filled their pockets with diamonds and rubies from the witch's treasure chest. Then, with never a backward glance at the sugar-sweet cottage, they ran into the forest. It seemed to Gretel that they had walked for miles and miles through the trees before they came at last to a vast stretch of water. "What shall we do now, Hansel?" she asked. "My legs ache so, I can scarcely take another step, and besides there is no bridge or ferry across the water to take us to the other side." As she spoke, a magnificent white bird came gliding towards them. At the sight of the bird swimming so easily and so gracefully, Gretel called softly, big beautiful bird, with neither bridge nor boat in sight, carry us on your back so white." To her joy, the beautiful bird swam to the bank where they stood, and Hansel shouted gleefully, "I do believe she will carry us to the other side. Come on, Gretel, let's climb on her back." "No, no, we shall be too heavy for her," Gretel protested. "You go first, Hansel, then she will come back for me." So the white bird carried Hansel over the water to the bank on the other side, and then came back for Gretel. When they were both safely ashore, Gretel thanked the white bird for her kindness, and before they continued on their way through the forest. To their surprise, they soon came to a part of the forest they had recognised, and then all at once there was their own cottage among the trees. With shouts of joy, the two children ran home, where their parents were overjoyed to see them. Well, that's a lovely story, Hansel and Gretel. I'm sure you'll hear many more versions of it. But for now, love you loads. Mwah.